On the line right now is our first guest. He actually taught us a masterclass on Frank Sinatra at Hofstra University. And honest to God, and considering that one lecture, that one class, he's one of the best professors I've ever had. Please welcome talk show host from 710 WOR, Mr. New York, Mark Simone. What's up, Mark?
Hey, how are you?
Good. Good. How you doing?
Good. I don't think they'd even normally let me into Hofstra as a student, but there I was teaching a master class.
I know, right? It was like, how funny is that? Like, but you did pretty well. You know a lot of stuff. Trust me, that you reached the standards. But
Okay.
I want to tell you the one thing about that was really cool when you did that entire lecture was when you started out mapping out basically the craft of being a successful artist, a successful person. So I guess you hit a couple of notes that I mentioned earlier in the show, and I just want to ask you what made Sinatra stand out between like Bing Crosby, Dean Martin. What made him like? 'Cause he really did change the music industry. He really did change change the music industry, change the world, kind of so to speak. What made him so special and unique?
Well, he started out as one of those guys. He sang just like those guys in the 1940s, and he had become very successful singing like that, which was to sing in a nice, sweet way with a very charming sort of voice and a beautiful voice. They called them crooners. They would just be very pleasant the way they sang. And then his career got wiped out at the end of that decade. So that basically he was down at the bottom in 51 and 52, and he reinvented himself, and he wanted to do something different. And he decided to, instead of singing like that, sing in a more powerful way, and the lyrics would mean something. Now, he was lucky. He was one of the greatest actors ever. This is a guy that got 3 Academy Awards and never took an acting class. But he decided to act out those lyrics. They were no longer songs; they were plays. They were 3-minute plays, and he started to take it very personally. They were all about him. So that ballad about loneliness was about him, and he started to sing them in this much deeper, darker voice, and in this gut-wrenching kind of way. And the lyrics became so powerful. Now, the technique of getting those lyrics across, he went to blues singers like Billie Holiday and Mabel Mercer and took their techniques and put them into pop music. Nobody had ever done that before. So suddenly he sounded different from everybody else. And he said in an interview once, which he did at a university, but I think it was at Yale, he said, everybody was trying to be Crosby, and I realized there was no point in that. Let me try to be something totally different. And when he reinvented himself, that's when he came back and had the biggest single career ever in the history of show business.
That came in the 50s, correct? Around there,
Yeah,
when he did like Come Fly With Me?
54 till the end. Nobody was ever bigger in the history of show business. At one moment, he was the biggest movie star in the world, the biggest nightclub and concert star in the world, biggest recording star in the world, biggest TV star in the world. He literally dominated everything.
And let me ask you, was this true that he actually wanted the role from On the Waterfront over Brando, Brando's character's role in there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he had it. He had the role. Brando was a Broadway star. He became so hot on Broadway. He was just the hottest thing in the world for a second there. So they got rid of Sinatra just to give Brando the role. They knew it would sell tickets. And it turned out he was a great actor. So that began the lifelong blood feud with Brando. And then the next year, there was a part Sinatra wanted in Guys and Dolls. They took his part and gave it to Brando, gave Sinatra the lesser part. So he never forgave Brando.
Right. Because he even sings "Luck Be a Lady" in that movie. Brando sings that, and I guess like Frank must have been like, I'm gonna be in Las Vegas singing that song so much better than he is. Probably that was going on.
Yeah, one of the dumbest moments in film history. That Brando, who couldn't sing that song, and have Sinatra stand there and watch him.
Yeah, no, right. And tell me if this is true or not. Like, because Sinatra was a big spontaneity kind of guy, he liked spontaneity because he was a singer and did everything on the stage. He liked doing one take in movies. He didn't like to do multiple takes. And then he's like sitting in a diner with Brando and Guys and Dolls, and Brando does like 8 takes. So I hear like he even like messed up some of his lines just to annoy Frank during that when they were shooting that.
Yeah, that was true. But it's a little myth to all of that. He would do multiple takes in a recording studio. He was in a recording studio as a singer and musician, the greatest technician, craftsman in the world. He would do hundreds of takes if he had to. But when it came to acting in a film, he was smart enough to know he wasn't a real actor. He just had some natural talent, but he wasn't a craftsman. He had no technique, and he knew he couldn't repeat it over and over again. He would lose it after the first or second take. So that's why in films, you had to get it in one take, maybe two, because unlike Brando, who was a real technician, he couldn't repeat the performance over and over again. It would just get stale if he did it.
And tell me if this is true or not. I've listened to your show, so you mentioned this so many times before, how he was like a Bogart copycat. He loved Humphrey Bogart, and he really even like tried to emulate him in so many different ways. Was that because of the movies that he watched, like The Big Sleep and other movies?
No, no, not at all. It was personally he emulated Bogart. The Bogart offstage. You know, when Sinatra became famous, it happened very fast. By 23, he's a superstar, and he's in Hollywood, and he's just a kid from Hoboken, New Jersey. He had no idea how to dress, how to talk, how to act. So he latched onto Bogart and became very close, and he copied everything Bogart did, everything Bogart wore in real life, all these cashmere sweaters that Bogart had, and whatever sport coats Bogart wore, he copied, and he decorated his house to look like Bogart's. He tried to throw parties like Bogart did. Humphrey Bogart had a little group that would come over every few nights, and they started to call him the Rat Pack. It was a group of celebrities. So even years later, when Bogart was gone, Sinatra created his own Rat Pack, and that's where he got the name.
And that's so funny. Also, speaking of the Rat Pack, when he did Ocean's 11, I was talking to one writer who wrote a biography on Sinatra one time called Sean Levy. Nice guy. He said to me, actually, like when he was doing those movies, he did it purely almost just so he can hang out in Las Vegas with his friends. Like they didn't start shooting until like 5 p.m. at night. Was that true?
Yeah, well, I think it's more like 1 p.m. He used to wake up about noon. Now, it's hard to believe, but in those days, even though they were the biggest stars in the world, you had to do 2 shows a night in Las Vegas. That was the requirement. The biggest stars would do 2 shows, and on Friday and Saturday, you do 3 shows a night. So by the time I think the second show was like a midnight show, 1 o'clock. So then they'd go out all night, go to sleep like 7 in the morning, wake up about noon. They'd start filming in the afternoon. And if something was too long, like there was one scene that was too complex, so one of the actors showed it to Sinatra, and he said, "Did you see how complex this scene is?" Sinatra just ripped the pages out of the script. He goes, "All right, it's out." That's the way he ran that movie.
That's hilarious. Actually, yeah, because it was all name recognition at that time, I guess, for that movie, so they were really the boss on set. That's pretty cool. Let me ask you this. So, like, people forget, you mentioned before how he got an Oscar. His first Oscar was in the 40s, I believe, for The House I Live In.
Yeah.
So why was that project so important to him? Because it was like a really small film at the time. It was like years ago, too.
Yeah, it was a small film, but it was so radical and controversial. It was about bigotry and discrimination. Nobody ever touched those subjects before. And in show business, there was a lot of discrimination. The black performers couldn't play the most famous nightclub in the world, the Copacabana. Even in Las Vegas, even in the 50s, late 50s, Sammy Davis could star at the Sands Hotel, but he couldn't stay there. He wasn't allowed to actually walk through the lobby or any of that stuff. So Sinatra made that film in the 40s. It was important to him. It was risky, but he did it, and got his first Oscar for that. And then he was the guy that integrated the nightclubs. And he was the guy, he had a lot of power in Las Vegas that finally demanded black performers be able to stay in the hotel, walk through the hotel, eat in the restaurants. And he broke down all those barriers.
If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Mark Simone about Frank Sinatra. Also, I want to ask you, going on him with the Oscars, him in From Here to Eternity, some people say, the whole Johnny Fontaine from The Mob, Godfather, that is all based off him. That's all just silliness, right? He got that role because of Ava Gardner, right?
Yeah, but he got that for 47 different reasons. He was just the most aggressive, toughest business guy in the world. He did everything he could to get that film. He had everybody he knew call the studio, call the producer, call the director. It was the biggest campaign ever to get it. He used to, back then you'd get about $80,000 for a role like that, which would be a fortune today. He agreed to do it for $8,000. The head of the studio, by the way, was a great cheapskate, so that really was a big factor. Ava Gardner was fighting for him. But the role eventually went to Eli Wallach. Sinatra didn't get it. And then at the last minute, Eli Wallach wanted to go to Broadway and do this important Broadway show. So he quit. Sinatra was next, and he got it.
How can you picture Eli Wallach in that role? How would he have been different, if you think of anything?
Yeah, it wouldn't have worked. But Eli Wallach was a real serious actor. Whereas, remember, Sinatra, this is still before he made all this great films, so nobody thought he could act. The only thing he'd done before were those Gene Kelly musicals, so nobody took him seriously as an actor till this film.
That's true. Yeah, that's true when you think about it. Also, I'm going to run through some movies, and I just want to get your thoughts on them, because it's Sinatra buff. I just want to see what you think. You ever seen the movie High Society?
Yeah.
What do you think of that one? Because he's in there with Bing Crosby. That's been a huge deal for him.
Well, Crosby was one of the guys he idolized. In real life, Crosby had really no use for Sinatra. Didn't hang around with him much. He thought he was a bit of a crude guy. And Sinatra had a thing about he would sleep with every leading lady in every film. He always did that, except for Grace Kelly in that film. He was afraid to try anything in front of Crosby. He was too intimidated. And he didn't want to strike out in front of his idol. So it never happened. But, that was a Cole Porter musical.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big Cole Porter musical. When Sinatra was unknown, before he got famous, he was singing in a little place called the Rustic Cabin. And he was an unknown little singer. Cole Porter came in one night to just happened to walk into this club. So Sinatra got so excited, he decided he would sing Cole Porter's Night and Day. But when he got on stage, the first time he ever froze on stage, he just completely froze, couldn't remember the words, just started stammering and walked off stage. It's the only time it ever happened to him. Now, years later, 25 years later, they're doing High Society. And finally, at one point, Cole Porter was visiting the set. Sinatra took him aside. He said, "You won't remember this." But he started to describe the night, and Cole Porter said, "I remember it. I never forgot that. It was the strangest thing I ever saw."
Well, at least he left a good impression on him. So also when you have another movie like Man with the Golden Arm, I actually really like Otto Preminger did that, and I really like the score of that movie, that jazzy score of it. But one thing that was really cool is like contrasting I think this is the darkest movie that he's ever done. He ever did in his life.
Yeah, well, it would be a tie. It would be that and the movie Suddenly, where he played a crazy presidential assassin.
Right, the guy with the purple star, right? He always says that in the movie. But which of the two? I mean, you got that and you had the Manchurian Candidate, which are both about presidential assassinations. That's so funny considering he was also a big Kennedy buff, like a huge fan of the Kennedys.
Well, it was strange because the Manchurian Candidate was 1962, and it came out, it was a big hit, and it was just months after that the president actually was assassinated. So they had to pull the film off the market, and it wasn't seen for almost 30 years. Nobody saw it.
Yeah.
In fact, he was on Larry King one night in the late 90s, and Larry King said, "It's one of your best films. It's a shame it's banned from the market." And Sinatra said, "Yeah, I wish the producers would release that. I wish they would put that back out." And Larry King said, "Well, you own it. Your company owns the film." And he said, "I didn't know that." And he said, "I'll have it released tomorrow." That's how it came back out.
Yeah, nothing. Talk about power, right? Let me ask you, just tuning in, we're talking to Mark Simone. I want to ask you like another question or two, but you talked about how like his songs were all about loneliness. He had this theme. I remember you talking about this. Really interesting. Left an impression on me when you say how like if you're going to be somebody, brand yourself, you have to have like a theme to talk about. Themes to talk about. There was a big thing with loneliness. You mentioned all the songs were about loneliness. Explain to me a little bit about his upbringing. Like what made him so lonely?
Well, in real life, he was always surrounded by people. You go to dinner with him, there's 45 people. You go in his living room, there's 30 people sitting. There was always people. And I asked him once, I said, why do you always do that? And he said, "I was an only child, and then as a kid, I was so lonely, I vowed I'd never be alone as an adult." So it was something that always haunted him. I was talking about those singers in the 40s. That was the other difference. They were all happy in their songs. Even though they were singing those ballads, they were like happy-go-lucky guys. This was the first singer ever to mainstream singer, who really sound emotional, sound lonely, sound bitter. And no one had ever done that before in songs.
I feel as if like most of the like greatest like artists are alone. There seems to be a theme in their lives. But I guess let me ask you, since you met Sinatra, you met him in like 80s and you kind of hung out with him. Do you have any like quick Sinatra stories that you can tell us, or anything like what was your impression of him when you met him?
Well, he was the most generous guy. You never saw a more generous guy than Sinatra. There was a time in a restaurant where it was 3 a.m, a coffee shop. The waitress was an old woman in her 60s, and he said, "Why do you work here? Why do you work here in the middle of the night?" She said, "Well, I'm trying to put my son through college." And he said, "Well, how much is that?" She said, "Well, it's $12,000 a year." He said, "No, the whole thing, the whole 4 years." She said, $60,000. Well, he wrote her a check right then and there for $60,000, paid for the kids' tuition. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was.
So generous. Anyway, this is Mark Simone and on the Screening Room, and thanks so much, Mark, for being here. I really appreciate it because this has been
thanks for having me.
No, I really do appreciate it. I guess I'll listen to you. You're off on Monday, so I guess I'll listen to you later in the week. But have a great day, sir. Appreciate it.
All right, I'll be listening to you too. Thanks.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Take care.
Bye.